Okay, so we're off. Thank you so much, Anika, for having me here. I'm so grateful to be doing this and to be sharing my work. Ever since I joined the GWCN network, I just keep discovering more and more about what you do, and it just keeps inspiring me. So this is extra special for me to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who's here and giving me your time. I'm Radha, and I run a magazine called Our Parking Magazine, like you probably know. And this magazine started about 2.5 years ago. And I'm going to tell you the whole story of how and why. But essentially, this slide shows me about 10 days ago, sitting at a gallery in Seoul called the Alternative Art Space IPO. And how I reached here is a small story that I'm going to be exploring. So about 3 years ago, I discovered the discipline of urban writing, and I realized this is what I wanted to do. So I thought that a great place to start would be to see how other people are writing about cities. And these were some of the books I read at the time. And because I am from an art and design background, I would make notes that sort of drew connections from all of the ideas that I was coming across in these books. And the more I thought, and one of these books, Learning from Las Vegas, is where I started really thinking about parking, and that was the beginning of it all. And the more I thought about parking, the more I realized that it really is everywhere, whether I was at home or whether I was in transit, traversing through streets, or whether I was at work or college or at a bar or at the mall. There was just parking everywhere. And so I decided to investigate. I wanted to see what these spaces were all about. And because I majored in something called public space design, I was interested in public parking lots, especially. So these were two parking lots, the JC Road parking lot and the KR Market parking lot, that I began to frequent really often. And this was in Bangalore. Um, and so I would go and look at the different things that were scribbled on the walls. I would document the different people who were doing different things. Like this parking lot was the JC Road parking lot, and there were lots of mechanic shops right across the street. So many people would go buy their parts from the shops and then come to the parking lot to repair their cars, or then drivers would do that, or even mechanics at the shops would bring cars customers' cars over to the parking lot to repair them. And then there would also be food trucks who would come and distribute food to poor people just as for free as a donation. And then there would be other people who just come to lounge and sit and hang out. There would be animals. This is the KR Market parking lot. KR Market is literally one of Asia's biggest markets. And so it was a really chaotic parking lot, much more than the JC Road parking lot, which already had lots of people coming and going and doing different things. And I met the different people. This was a cobbler at the JC Road parking lot. This was one of the shopkeepers at KR Market parking lot. Um, these were the parking attendants. And so then slowly ideas started emerging over time. And I was wondering, you know, these were some of the things that came up for me. Like there was lots of pollution. So whether it was waste pollution, noise pollution, chemical pollution, there was just lots of different kinds of pollution. And then affordability was an idea that came up. There was always lots of chai. I don't remember an hour passing where I was not handed a cup of chai. And it was great because Bangalore has cloudy weather and sometimes it rains a bit. So a cup of chai is precisely what you need to make any experience just slightly better. Um, and then, of course, this idea that, these parking lots are not a great place for women, because people would tell me that I shouldn't be here, or that, in a few hours it's going to be night. So you should probably just like pack up your things and go home. And so from these ideas, the initial first few writings started to emerge. And one of the first articles that I wrote was called Leave by Sunset, which was about my gendered experience of inhabiting parking lots. It was a personal essay on the things people had told me and the way I was perceived and challenges I faced just being a young girl in a parking lot in India. And then another thing that I wrote initially was, can Bangalore's municipal parking lots double as vibrant public spaces? This was an essay on qualitative qualities of the parking lots that I was visiting and their ability to be good public spaces. And then I also wrote like a phenomenological essay on parking lots in Bangalore, and a small essay on the new policy that the government had introduced into the city. And so then I started looking at other stories that were outside of my subjective experience. And one of the questions that I was really interested in asking is, how are parking lots perceived by people of Bangalore? And this is where my instincts as a storyteller really kicked in, because I was interested in narrative approaches and stories and looking at really this idea of how people think of parking lots. So I started designing surveys and going to parking lots and going back to the same parking lots and speaking to people who I met. And these were some of the things people said. And it should come as no surprise that sometimes people even fabricated stories. But what is interesting is what kind of stories they fabricated. So they didn't fabricate stories of, I had my first kiss in a parking lot, or I celebrated my birthday once in a parking lot, or one birthday I had this amazing experience where some wish of mine was granted. No, it was not like that. It was more along the lines of, one evening I was parking my car in the basement of this parking lot and I saw something in the shadows, and it scared the hell out of me, so much so that I was ill for many weeks that followed. And this man went on to try to convince me about how ill he was for so many weeks that he couldn't even get out of bed, and he was so shocked by the sight that he saw. And then other things that people told me were, one of my friends was attacked by a group of men and he had some money and he was really scared, and so he called me, and then I gathered up a bunch of my friends and we went and beat them up, and things like that. So I mean, I guess this is also telling of how parking lots are portrayed in pop culture, like in cinema and things like that. So I mean, I'm sure if I ask anybody here, what are the first few adjectives that come to mind when thinking or imagining a parking lot? It's often criminal activity, or like darkness and dingy corners, or just being lost in a parking lot because they're so gigantic and have very little navigation or wayfinding. Um, one of the nice things that was said was by this cleaning lady, who said, after the construction of the first floor, we will decorate the building with flowers and rangolis to make it look nice and welcoming. So this is one of the few positive things that came up, but mostly it was stuff about crime and about scary things. And then the other source of information that I found, or source of like perceptions, was Google reviews. So I spent a lot of time just scrolling through different Google reviews of parking lots and seeing what people have to say. And one of the Google reviews that I will never forget was a review of the JC Road parking lot that basically said, this parking lot is so old and derelict that I'm surprised the building hasn't fallen down and broken as yet. And then, so it really gave me an idea about how people were talking about it, what were things that were important when considering a parking lot. And so Google reviews are something that feature in the first and second publication that I have made on parking lots. And then other things I did were, I made this collection of no parking signs. Sorry, excuse me for a moment. Other things I did were make this collection of no parking signs. And then I wrote a book review of this book called Rethinking a Lot, which is about the design and culture of parking. Then featured in this first magazine was also an interview with the founder of an app called Parkin. which is designed to help people of Ahmedabad find parking spaces in the city. And I also wrote a little fiction story based on somebody who I met in a parking lot called A New Home for a New Friend. Sorry. And so this is what the contents page kind of looked like for the first magazine. And I was really lucky because it was pretty well received. I had the opportunity to present my work at the Indian Institute of Human Settlements, and I took all the participants of the workshop into the building's parking lot, and we sat and sort of observed what kind of a space it was and how it made us feel and what were the colors and what were things that were really coming up for us. And it was a rather interesting discussion. And so that's when the idea started to really expand, and this idea of doing an annual magazine on parking began to emerge. And so then the second magazine, which was Amchi Parking, was conceptualized. Amchi Parking, while Nama Parking was based in Bangalore, Amchi Parking was based in Panjim, Goa, which is another state along the western coast of India. And the difference was that in the Amchi Parking, we had 13 different contributors, while in the Nama Parking, it was primarily my writing and research. The Amchi Parking featured works of many different people, and we had 3 sponsors and several retailers across the state. And this is kind of what the contents page looked like. It's grouped similarly into studies, aesthetics, perspectives, a review, an interview, and some fun stuff. But in this magazine, I also started exploring this idea of mooring. So because essentially all transportation vessels need terminal capacity, and there's a process by which they enter into terminal capacity, and I wanted to really look at that ethnographically and to study it. And so in collaboration with a filmmaker and photographer whose name was Himon, we documented how all the fishermen's boats were parked. And it's a rather intensive process because it takes about 30 or 40 different men who heave and push and pull the boat, and you need rope and you need this paint and you need wood, and it takes at least half an hour before a boat it takes at least half an hour for a boat to be moored from when it's in sea to when it's parked on land. These are some more pictures, and then these are about 30 or 40 boats that are all parked by the same group of people. And then we had an artist whose name is Vinayak Suresh, who did a series of collages of a story of parking in his locality in Kerala. There was a photo series of old cars parked in front of old buildings by Nathan Fernandez, who is a classic car enthusiast, and he runs an Instagram page called Parked in Goa, where he documents cool classic cars parked in Goa. And then in collaboration with Vishesh Anand, I also did a series of portraits of parking attendants, which is one of the most, it's one of the best things I think that was part of this magazine, because the pictures and the stories, and it just came out really nicely. Then what I also did was Kanish Devgan wrote an essay called Lost and Found, which is about how parking features in contemporary poetry. So he found poems that have mentions of parking lots, or there are stories in poems that are set in parking lots, and he wrote about how parking lots are described and why the author made, or the poet made, the choice to set the story in a parking lot. And then there was also a submission by a Goa-based architect whose name is Dean D'Cruz, called the 8 Feet Car. It's basically the design of a car which, when parked, can be remodeled to be a sort of parklet where people can hang out. And then, amongst other things, I also wrote another Leave by Sunset issue, which was about my gendered experience of parking lots in Goa. And and the reason it continued to feature in my next magazine was because I feel like it continued to be a relevant experience to talk about. Then there was, will there be parking lots in the metaverse, which was a discussion with Mayur Gupta, the CEO of a crypto-based virtual reality platform, about will there be parking lots in the metaverse, which was quite an entertaining conversation. And a film review of the Parking Lot movie, which is a documentary film that talks about all the people and the parking lot and the corner parking lot in Charlottesville, Virginia. And this was written by Lamia Huda. And then there was just some fun stuff. And then we come to Seoul, which is where I have been for the last 3 months or so. And I was really lucky to have met Kyung Suk, who's also a fellow GWCN member, and her business partner, Juyup Cha, and this is all of us. And she was a great help because she introduced me to some ideas about parking and mobilities and culture in Korea. And I'm so grateful to her help. One idea that she introduced me to was this idea of being car poor, which is a common phenomenon in Korea, where essentially people aspire so strongly to have cars and use cars, and not just any car, but a good car that can be something to show off. That often they accumulate large amounts of debt in order to be able to do so. And so then there's lots of people who, don't have very nice houses, or have years and years of debt just to have a nice fancy car. And then another person who I met through Kyung Suk was Mr. Park Channon. This is him and me. And he's the pioneer of the public art movement in South Korea, and I was really lucky to have been able to meet him. He started something called the Suksu Art Project, which is essentially an art project set in a market in Korea on the outskirts of the city of Seoul. And this is a plan of the market. So you can see that there's this large central space, which essentially is the parking lot. And this project started in 2007. And at that point, only part of the lot was used, and all these purple spaces are essentially empty shops that artists would work out of. So they would rent it from the owner of the space for very cheap, and then they would use all of these spaces to create art installations and do public art projects, and work with the shopkeepers and locals to do different kinds of events. And this is how it looks essentially from the top. So there are shops all around and a parking lot in the center. So the Seoul magazine is going to have a story about this parking lot and all the art projects that have happened here. These are some images from the parking lot. There's lots of murals, there's lots of shops, lots of little things to see. And then another person I had the pleasure of meeting was, well, her English name is Mint, and she runs an art space called Plus Period. And one of the projects that she's done was about this huge housing complex on the outskirts of Seoul that was demolished, and that was going into the land was going into redevelopment, and so the whole building was going to be demolished. And essentially what struck her was how people's lives were just sort of discarded in piles in the parking lots of the building. And so she had this idea that all of the stuff should be documented, and that maybe we can build a living archive of the stories of these people whose stuff is just lying around in parking lots, ready to be just, thrown away in a garbage dump and never to be used again, which is also probably going to be in the next parking magazine. And then another story that we're doing is parking lots in K-pop videos, because you can't talk about Korea without talking about K-pop and K-dramas and K-music. And lots of videos, K-pop music videos feature parking lots as the settings. And so I've been on a mission to find out everything I can about the different parking lots that are featured in K-pop videos. And then another story that I'm working on the Seoul issue is working on for the Seoul issue is a discussion on women's parking in Korea. So about 5 years ago, the Korean government had introduced special designated women's parking, and that was something that had been widely encouraged across the country. But a few years later, the government sort of retracted that rule and said that let's change all the women's parking into like general parking for people with disabilities, pregnant women, and anybody who has any special need. And there was a huge uproar around this decision because it was deemed anti-feminist. And so the idea for this is to be a discussion on women's parking and whether it should even be a thing. And then another thing that I'm working on is to document all of the different plants that I find in parking lots and to do a small study on their varieties and types and kinds. There's also going to be a photo series of murals in parking lots, and also maybe a philosophical exploration of the wastelessness of temple food cooking versus the wastefulness of autocentric planning. There's also going to be, so one of the things that I did was a collaboration with the Seoul Urban Sketchers at where we invited 30 artists to come and draw different aspects of a parking lot together one cold winter morning. And these are some of the drawings. These are all the artists, and their works are also going to feature as a story in the Seoul Parking magazine. And in addition to that, some more works by me, and also a photo series from Argentina, a series of parking lot artworks from Lithuania, another story from California, and maybe a few more stories from India. And I'd like to invite you and all those who are here also to write to me and to be part of this book if you have anything to say about parking. I'd be happy to publish it and to talk about it if there's anything happening locally or anything you'd like to say. And so our parking is essentially a project by All Things R. And in addition to our parking, there's also another project called Our Press. So the Our Parking magazine is a publication project that is a collaboration between Our Press and Our Parking. And other projects by Our Press are the Indian Voices of Walkability book that I'm doing with Annika, and I'm so excited about it. So if and there's also a guide to water in Bangalore and Cycling Cities Conversation book. But the Indian Voices of Walkability book is something that we have been talking about for a few months, and it started out and now the book. So if there's anybody you know who'd like to be part of this book, please also do share it with them. We'd be happy to talk about different aspects of walkability. We have, up to now, we have voices from Mumbai, Pune, the Northeast, some states in Northeast India, I think Orissa, and maybe even Leh. So we're quite excited, and people have written to us about things that we didn't even know were connections to walkability that we could explore. And so, yeah, please do engage with us, tell us about different stories or experiences of parking. Do also buy our magazines to support the work that I do. This is the link to my Substack, and I'm always happy to talk about anything related to parking or mobilities. Thank you so much for having me. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to discuss and share. If anybody would like to say anything.
Thank you, Radha, for your presentation. I think it was very interesting, like a point of view that I really liked, because I always have a stressful relationship with parking lots. So this was another point of view, more artistic literature-ish combined, so it was quite nice. And I started to write the story in my mind about the parking lot I'm using. So yeah, if I start documenting it, I think I can maybe share more later. But I
That'd be
definitely
lovely.
connect the things you are talking about, the shops in the parking lot or around, and how people are using, what are the stories happening. Yeah, it's quite interesting. I really like the idea of collecting voices about this.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank
Would
you
you like?
also, Radha. Yes, you
Oh,
say what you.
I was just gonna say, would you like to also share a little bit about the parking lot whose story you are imagining? Like, what is the space and where is it?
The parking lot I'm thinking of is it has layers, like it's called multi-story, multi-level parking lot, or like that. And it's made by the municipality for the town I'm working at. So it's basically owned by the municipality, so they are the ones who are like checking, getting the payment, and they have cameras. Sometimes they make announcements because there are teenagers who are cycling in the parking lot because not it's safer perhaps for them because the cars are static. And I sometimes hear when I'm like going to the car, I hear, please don't use the bicycles. You should go out and do your like exercises out in the street and stuff like that. And also sometimes I see boyfriend girlfriend in the fire exit and so on. Very many things are happening in that parking lot.
It's very true. I
um,
also at some point did um, a small essay on smells of a parking lot and sounds of a parking lot, which are on my Substack. Just thought of that. Yeah.
yeah, sounds, smells, sounds. Let me think. Sound. Yeah, like I guess you have the smell of what is that gas? The gas of the car, or are you talking? Is that what you were thinking, or?
No, this particular parking lot was under a bridge, and it was a really busy street intersection because it was under a bridge and there were just lots of different roads, and it was quite a dirty place actually in Bangalore. So there were lots of different smells to map, just like cigarette butts and gasoline and organic waste and organic waste. Yeah, just lots of different things.
Yeah. So the parking lot, what type of parking lots are common in the ones that you have analyzed? Are they mostly like open and people can park for free, or how is it managed?
Most of the parking lots that I've been studying are public parking lots because I feel like it doesn't make sense because I am a practitioner of public spaces. It doesn't make sense for me to work in, say, mall parking lots or housing society parking lots. So a lot of them are public parking lots. Most of them are paid parking lots. The ones that are not paid, which are quite common in India, because if there's just a huge city, I mean, parking, if any real estate in a huge city that's empty is essentially just going to turn into a parking lot at some point. So I don't generally study those. I have documented them a little bit, but I think what's interesting to me is the slightly more formalized parking lots where there are parking attendants and people are collecting money and people know, and it's kind of on Google Maps as a parking lot. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it could also differ on the location, like under the bridge parking lot or open air parking lot or private or yeah, as you say, public. They could also have different things happening in them. So
Like the JC Road parking lot and the KR Market parking lot, that were both my primary sites to study in Bangalore. They both had KR Market parking lot was primarily a basement parking lot, and JC Road was a multi-level parking lot.
what difference? What is your, like, how do you differentiate them other than it's parking, public and private? Or sorry, public and multi-level? What? Sorry, I missed. I got confused. Can you explain the difference again?
Sure, yeah. One of them was primarily a basement parking lot. So it
Basement.
was
Okay.
just an underground parking lot.
Yeah.
And the other was a multi-level parking lot,
Okay.
like the one you described.
The one
Levels.
that multi-level, does it have other functions?
It does not have other functions. So part of what I suggested in the article was, when I was writing the article about 3 years ago, there was this new plan for 50 multi-level parking lots across the city of Bangalore. And part of what I had envisioned as an idea for these parking lots is for there to be a sort of joint program where each of these parking lots are sort of treated as cultural nodes, and maybe people can exhibit artworks. There can be layers of functionality added to these parking lots in addition to them being parking lots. And yeah, so that was my idea, because Bangalore is doing something similar like this with metro stations. They have this project called Art in Transit, where they're trying to make metro stations sort of cultural hubs in the city. And so a lot of them have murals and art installations and things like that. But I was thinking if we can take it one step further with parking lots across the city, because they are at very strategic locations that have a lot of traffic and that, you know, people frequent often, which is why there is going to be a huge multi-level parking lot there. Then yeah, they could be nodes of culture, and we could create a joint program and have lots of other things that are part of this network.
In the multi-layered parking lot, we have as once a week marketplace that local people come and sell their organic vegetables and fruits.
Is
and
this
whatever.
in like extra, like how does it work? Are the cars removed, or is it just not full enough generally that this can happen?
I think they have one part of the ground floor separated specific for this marketplace.
I see.
But the thing is, it's only used for the market once a week, and the rest of the days it's not being used.
I see.
So there's no car parking there at all. It's always empty.
I see.
But now that I was listening to your stories, I thought they could also use it, like the rest of the days it could be rented, or there can be many other events happening in that parking lot, because it's in the very central of that town, in that town. So yeah, just having some brainstorming about this was interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to hearing more about this parking lot from you.
Oh, I hope I can manage to do the documentation I'm thinking of. But I was also thinking how if we can combine this with teenagers, because I think they're using it. So looking at the parking lot from their perspective could also be an interesting topic.
For sure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear all those stories. It seems like you have a long history with multi-level parking, which in Romania, in comparison, it's pretty new. We don't have too many multi-level parking. constructed by the municipality. So everything we have, it's seen as a luxury and something expensive because it's built by the private. And we usually have them around malls and shopping centers. So there is no way you can create an environment to live, repair cars, or I don't know, just use the space differently, as you just told us. Because during the night they're closed. There are cameras, and the security is pretty strict. And one question: are these multi-level parking lot or basement parking lot, have they managed to free the street maybe from cars, or are there cars on the streets and in these parking lots?
No, they're not usually very successful in being able to free the streets. I think it's a function of many things. One is convenience. Like if people just want to quickly run into a shop and get something, then they end up parking on the street. Many people also just don't want to pay for parking, so they end up parking on the street. One of the shopkeepers near JC Road parking lot said, I've never parked my vehicle in the parking lot because there's space right in front of my shop. And so I just park it here. And I guess also for women, maybe it's a question of safety.
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. I have, there's here a parking lot that's been privately built, but that's an area which was supposed to be freed from cars on the streets by building that parking. And as you say, people don't use it. They just park on sidewalks, along the streets, and yeah, basically they don't want to pay the parking. And this is an interesting talk about should parking on the street or in these municipal parkings should be free or paid. And definitely in people's views, they should be free. Here in Romania, especially in residential area, it's a pretty interesting debate to see that people see it's something given that if you live somewhere, you automatically need to have a parking space or two. Two would be awesome. In the public space for you to keep the cars.
Yeah.
How is it there?
It's the same. I mean, I know lots of American cities, there are almost 7 parking spaces per person,
Okay.
which is quite ridiculous. I don't think India is quite as bad because we have a large working class population who can't afford cars. But it's getting worse and worse. And especially like in Mumbai, just a few years ago, we started working on the coastal road project, which is this huge project. And at the time, only 14% or 20% of Mumbai's population own cars. So it really begs the question of who are we building all of this automobile infrastructure for, so many parking lots and so many roads, when such a large percentage of the population just uses the trains and the other public transport. Yeah.
Just in case we need it.
Just in case.
Yeah. And as you said, I was just reading yesterday that in the States, there is more dwelling for cars than for people. Yeah, so
It's true.
Amazing. Hard to imagine, but it's there.
Donald Shoup is a huge advocate of paid parking to make sure that the land is valued as it should be in a city where space is scarce. And what he says is that on-street parking should be expensive and then off-street parking less expensive, so that people will end up parking in the parking lots as compared to on streets, which will free up. And then he has this idea of demand-based parking, and it's being applied in lots of places. San Francisco was one of the first cities to sort of experiment with it, where over time they keep fluctuating the price of the parking space on streets based on whether there's demand for it. So that way, if there's too much demand, then the price goes up, and that on its own discourages people, just the right amount of people, from bringing their cars there.
Yeah. And maybe do they use that money to offer and create the alternatives, transit,
That is the
public
idea.
transport?
That is the idea.
Yeah. That's interesting. Very nice.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Radha. I really enjoyed that. I've only read very little on parking, so it was very eye-opening, because I think a bit like what Raluca was saying before about a bit in Europe in general, not everywhere, but most places, parking is getting more and more privatized and into paid parking locations. And there's kind of, which has given me now, I now want to start exploring that after this this presentation. But there's kind of connections. So for example, here I'm in southern Spain at the moment, and here where I am, there's kind of political connections with the parking owners, and then they start pedestrianizing, which we're all obviously we love pedestrianization, but they're doing it on purpose to get rid of parking lots so that people have to use the paid parking. And it's kind of these mixtures that are happening there, and it's, you know, you just see where the interests go. But it's fantastic to see all that kind of, because lots of what you were describing is where the parking becomes a public space, and then everyone interacting and using the space more. It's not just about the parking, isn't it? It's much more.
Mm-hmm. It is. I majored in something called public space design, so that those sensibilities seem to keep appearing in my work, even with parking. Just to think about it as spaces in the public realm and spaces for everyone to use. Yeah, but thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So much work to do now on my town now. Oh.
Yeah, we need to start maybe a global parking correspondence network.
That would be amazing, actually. There's a network called Parking Reform Network, PRN, actually, and they have representatives from all around the world who are working to abolish parking mandates and doing lots of work in advocacy, actually. So if anybody is interested, I can share a link to PRN right here.
How do just a question rather on there in Bangalore, is there, like, when somebody like the council or somebody says we're going to get rid, if they say we're going to get rid of a parking place, do people, like, is the protest very big? Do people kind of try to defend their parking areas?
Absolutely. I think this is a universal phenomena, at least where there aren't too many alternatives. But yeah, it's definitely going to be a problem, because people like to sit in their comfortable cars, especially since COVID. People have been buying more cars and driving more. It's unless there's enough alternative options, which doesn't seem like it's also just the culture of using public transport is not something that affluent people just practice or embrace even. Yeah, it would be a problem for sure.
Hi Radha, Sonali this side.
Hey,
I'm from
Sonali.
Mumbai. Yeah, it was a really good presentation. And so, as you said that, about the coastal road that you gave one of the examples. So, yesterday you might have seen on the news the Trans Harbour Link, Mumbai Trans Harbour Link that links Mumbai and New Mumbai, the sea bridge. So, it's one of the Asia's largest sea bridge. So I work with the Mumbai Port Authority as a consultant urban designer, and I had the chance to visit the MTHL couple of times before it was inaugurated. So
Okay.
basically, it was such a concrete jungle, and with so many flyovers just flying about, no green space at all. It was so hot that even in the month of December, I could not bear to stand even for 2 minutes because of the concretization that's happening with no green spaces. And with regards to parking, so where I live in Mumbai, in nearby Bandra area, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are many parking spaces below, in the basements below the buildings, which belongs to the municipal council, that is MCGM. But most of these have been locked either or have been occupied by businesses for all those activities like clothes, some or the other businesses that are occupying the basements illegally, saying that there is no parking available. And so there is one activist that he works around. So this was put up by him, and I had myself verified if there used to be a parking lot that has been taken up by illegal activities. And to avoid the parking issue onto the streets that causes the congestion, the government had come up with a solution of turning a park into a parking area. So there was initially there were proposals in Juhu, there was proposal in Bandra of turning parks into parking, but there has been regular protest. It has been stalled for the moment, but you never know when that proposal can recirculate again and the park is gone and the parking has come up. So there are very few green spaces here in Mumbai, unlike Bangalore or even Delhi or Pune, but they are completely all the time under threats.
Thank you for sharing. It's true. Bombay seems to be getting worse. I hope maybe with the metro that people will choose that as an alternative over driving. It's anyway such a nightmare to drive in Bombay.
It is, but everyone wants to be on the roads and drive all the time. And as you see, the government is emphasizing on building up roads. We are going the American culture of building freeways, and so which Jane Jacobs has rightly mentioned in her book, that these don't solve definitely the congestion problems. And what the US has faced in 60s to 90s period, that we are just trying to walk into their shoes rather than learning from their examples, what has succeeded, what has failed, what could have been the alternatives. That there is a gap in understanding and implementing that.
It's true. We are often just blindly following.
And to my surprise, the coastal road and any other infrastructure, the roads that have been built up, they do not have any public transport, or even if the public transport is proposed, so they don't have any feeder points. So practically it's running into a loss. So the public transport has to move through the city areas where they have people who want to travel. So it is difficult. It is a challenging situation.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully, more conversations like this can lead to more awareness and more activism and better cities.
True. Just hopeful about that.
If I can jump in and say something, we're also coming up to the end of the session. Radha, that was so interesting. I'm so glad we got to do this. And I do have to mention, we're going to publish this at the Pedestrian Space YouTube channel. We're hosting this right now. It is what, about 1700 in India? So it's yeah, 12:30 here. In Europe, we started at 11 a.m. Central European time, and many of our network members in other regions, like the Americas, are likely asleep. And I know there's so many parking-minded people in our network who are just not awake right now, or they'd be here. So it'll be great to publish this. But then if you want to think about hosting another session at a different time for other people in the network, I think it would be really interesting, because we really have a lot of very passionate parking-minded people. We've had multiple network sessions that I actually let go over time and finally had to close because the topic got on parking. And I think a lot of clearly as this particular session shows, I feel like the bad guy probably closing it on time. I have a feeling you guys can talk about parking for a very long time. And I just want to say, I want to rewind back to before I knew you, which was not so long ago. And I think from our parking mag, you like something at pedestrian space, and I happened to see it. The account name caught my eye, and I have to confess, I thought, am I being trolled? You know, it's a parking account liking, you know, walkability stuff. So I went to the Our Parking Mag account, and I remember just being like, what is this? This is such a mind twist. You know, you look at the heading for the car enthusiast, so I'm like, okay, here we go. But instead, it was not at all what you expected. And so I think I wrote to you immediately, and here we are. And I just think, you know, this ethnographic approach, sitting here learning about your background, for me, being part of this network has awakened me to how interesting parking is. But I would say before, I would consider parking to be a very boring topic, in fact. And to me, what you do, you awaken interest in a topic that I think for the average person, it's like, who's thinking about parking from a cultural view? I think it's extremely fascinating. I'm always really curious to hear you awaken a fascination in a topic that's, I think, typically not fascinating for many people, and I think that's great in the wider scheme of things, an auto-centric community. So thanks for your time today, and it's great. Actually, every single GWCN facilitator is here, all the network facilitators, and it was interesting hearing Merva talk too. She's a lecturer at an architecture university. I thought when we put this out too, we can put a call to the network to elicit stories, but then also bring to their groups and you know, spread awareness in the network as well about the work you're doing.
That would be lovely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Until we host the next one, maybe to include some
Yes.
other content. Thank you, Radha.
Thank you so much. Have a nice rest of the day.
Hi, Radha. That was really amazing. I'm like
Thank
so
you.
impressed with all the work that you're doing, and I'm glad that you already discovered that book, Rethinking a Lot. I thought that I would suggest it to you, but Akura, you already know, and I don't even yeah, it's we could have a lot of long conversations, I think, on many of these things. One of the things that personally I'm interested in is the sort of territorial aspects of parking.
Okay.
Like in Montreal, we're coming up against this very often, where on street parking, the city is trying to create more space for often bike paths and things like that, but sometimes bus lanes as well. And they need to remove on-street parking to do that. And the pushback from that is unbelievable. And it gets very personal, and it can get violent, actually. And so this sort of dynamic, how people relate to particularly on-street parking when it's in front of their home, and it's like theirs. Like your context is different because you're referring to parking structures, which is actually, I've been trying to promote this concept of community parking for a long time, and that's sort of what you have there. So like I think this is really fascinating to explore how these structures fit into a place, how they're embraced or adopted or not, and who controls them and how. Like these are all topics I'd really like to explore. If someone else wants to talk, I'll
But
let them
also,
go ahead.
just to let you know, we have a lot of on-street parking also, and I'm sure there's a lot of territorial problems around it because people love their parking space right in front of their homes or workspace or whatever. It's just that I've chosen to study a lot of parking buildings because I'm interested in public spaces and parking lots as public spaces.
No, I think it's wonderful what you're doing, and I think we actually need a lot more of public like this kind of thing. Like my idea behind community parking is really to recognize that in a way, parking is a community asset, and we need to treat it as such. And like we need to like streets as public space is really my obsession. So the act of storing a private vehicle in public space is problematic already. So like I want to get rid of that and find other ways to store vehicles. That's what my goal is with the community parking thing. But how we manage it and what that space means to the community is evolving clearly. And you already brought up a lot of the issues of safety and things like that. And no, it's really, this looks really, and your magazine looks brilliant. Like it looks really, really wonderful.
Thank you.
And I have an idea to submit. So something, there's a parking structure here that has been sort of converted into a community space. Like the upper floors are used for various activities. And I know people who are involved in the process. Like
Okay.
it was a fairly old structure that needed to be rehabilitated, and it was too expensive actually to rehabilitate it. And yet the property taxes on it were very high. Like even if to give it to citizens groups, like they couldn't afford it because there were like $100,000 a year in property taxes on it. So anyway, there was some sort of a mechanism came up, and I don't actually know what's going on with it now, but I think it would be an interesting thing to write about for your magazine.
That sounds lovely. Yeah, absolutely. I'll write to you more and we can.
Okay, great.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I guess there's no more questions and we've reached our 1 hour limit. So
Do you
thank
have my
you.
contact information, Radha?
If you can share it with me now, I'll write to you immediately.
Okay, I'll put it in the chat.
Maybe as you guys are doing that, I just want to pop in. First of all, we have a new member as of today to the network who joined Rufina, who's also in India, Vani. I just wanted to pop in and say, folks, yeah, before we close out, if anybody has questions or comments, also welcome Gregoire, who's in Mali.
So yeah, good evening, Radha.
Hey,
Yeah, I'm from Chennai, and your presentation was awesome.
thank you.
And I came to know that you visited IAHS too.
I did. The Bangalore one.
Great. Yeah, it's really great, and I'll go through your this thing, and we'll try to make a submission for this Indian Voices of Walkability.
That'd be great.
So myself, I'm an architect and an aspiring urban planner who is more interested into sustainable urbanism.
Okay.
So I joined Pedestrian Space today,
Awesome.
a newbie for this network.
Okay, great. So I think Anika has your details. We'll write to you and ask you what you'd like to submit about and share with you the brief we've put together.
Sure, I'll connect with you via mail.
That'll be great. Thank you.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Vlad, nice to see you.
Hi, Radha and everyone. Nice to see you again.
Thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Have you done the presentation, or where are we in the program?
Just finished.
Just finished, okay.
but it should have been recorded, hopefully.
We are recording. This will go on the Pedestrian Space YouTube channel. I'll send out the link when it's ready, and we're going to combine, because we did the same session last weekend, and Radha was wonderful enough to host it in this time, so we could accommodate folks in other time zones. And we do have, if Radha, if you're able to, we do have, we can leave it open a little while longer. And also to facilitate everybody linking up after, I would love to, if whoever's here is comfortable turning on their screens, taking a screenshot, I could share it later and tag everybody. We have, as usual for pedestrian, for GWCN meetings, we have a great geographic spread here: Montreal, Istanbul, Sikasso in Mali. Vani, you have to remind me where you are. I think she's in New Delhi.
India, yeah.
Yeah, and Chennai, India. So if we can do that at the end. So I will keep it open. So keep the questions coming, folks. And also with V's great interest, and when I hear community parking, I think it would be really great to have a session to learn more about what that is. But maybe we could do that for GWCN later.
That would be wonderful. And I mean, as of now, it's still a theoretical thing. Like, I think I would be really happy to collaborate with Radha about it, because the facilities she's showing already, in a sense, they function as that already. Like, I think one of the challenges is, what role does parking play in the community? And in North America, really, it's really just storage spaces, and there's not a lot of life there. And often there's, fears commonly associated, a lot of dark corners and things like that. But my vision is to have polyvalent spaces and create little mobility hubs that would actually be served by public transportation. And you could concentrate the neighborhood services in this, like garbage collection, recycling, composting, things like that. Like, have them in more residential areas. Like, that's sort of my idea. Like, really separate the parking from housing and have more space for people. And fundamentally decouple the parking from housing. Like, I think a big part of our problem is parking is everywhere, and people expect it to be everywhere. And this is really, we need to find a way to break that sort of association, where even if you're going to use a car, you're going to have to walk a bit, and that'll force people to appreciate their public space and reappropriate the public space. Like, in my opinion, this sort of car domination has led to a progressive detachment from public space. And even social relations have become much more fraught. And I think a lot of this is really because of how we get around in personal transportation. Like, we don't tolerate other people. And so there's lots and lots to discuss on that topic.
Yeah, it's not like Indian parking lots are planned to be public spaces, but they just happen to be because of how they're designed and of the culture.
I think that's like one of the things that's so special about India is they might do a lot of planning, but the reality of it is very, very different.
It's true. Yeah.
I think one thing that I've observed in Delhi and really urban ghettos in Delhi, I would say, is that they have lack of parking spaces, and people have these luxurious bungalows, but there's no parking space. So all of them are parking their SUVs on the pedestrian places, so on the pavements and everywhere. So that impacts the pedestrian environment, as in there's no walking space for pedestrians. And I think, yes, in that sense, I think homelessness is also leading to a lot of people living under flyovers and even within parking lots. So yes, that is there. So that contrast, I think, is there, that if you don't have availability of parking spaces, then you're just eating up into the walking space for everybody else on the road.
I mean, given that there's so many homeless people, it's funny that more land is not dedicated to building shelters as compared to just building parking lots.
Yeah, like demolition of their settlements for building parking lots.
Well,
So,
I mean, I think now we're saying in North America, cars are better housed than people, and there's more space allocated for cars than there are for people now. Like they've reached that point.
in
And
North
then,
America, there's 7 parking lots per person. Apparently, 40% of public land is just parking, including on-street parking, which is a huge amount.
no, it's really insane, this allocation, and it's implicitly sort of subsidized. Like the government, there's a lot of financial reasons why that happens. I suspect in India it's a little bit different, but it's still going down the same pathways in a lot of ways. So this is really the challenge. And I think I mentioned to you this like pushback about parking here in Montreal. And ironically, it's in a neighborhood that has a very high Indian and South Asian population. Like there's a lot of Indian and Pakistanis. And there are people like out protesting with signs, like they've sort of co-opted the messaging from the psychopaths, and they have signs like parking is life and things
Oh
like that.
no.
Like it's really special. And
It's terrible.
I'm gonna send a link to the project that I think might be interesting to write about. I'll put it in the chat, okay?
Sure, I have your email. I'll write you soon also.